Of the first elements of letters. For who sees not that the arts of well speaking, that is to say, grammar, logic, rhetoric, which are but the portents and wickets of science, but not of knowledge, are oft times the cause of more mischief than delight, which notwithstanding have no other rule of truth for their establishment than the decrees and statutes of their first institutors, which evidently appears in the invention of letters themselves, which are the elements and materials of all arts. The first letters were Chaldean, invented by Abraham, as Philo affirms, and were in use among the Chaldeans, Assyrians, and Phoenicians, though others say that Rhadamanth was the first that framed letters among the Assyrians. After this, Moses delivered certain characters to the Jews, though not the fame which are used to this day, the author of which Ezra is said to be, and not only so, but of all the books of the Old Testament. Afterwards, one Linus, a Chaldean, is said to have brought over letters of Phoenicius into Greece, being the Phoenician characters, which were there used until Cadmus, the son of Agenor, made public among them other new letters of another sort, 16 in number, to which in the time of the Trojan War Palamedes added 4 more, and after him Simonides the Milesian as many more. To the Egyptians it is said that one Memnon first taught the use of writing by the portraitures of beasts, as is seen in their obelisks. But as for letters, Mercury is said to be the first that gave them the knowledge thereof. That Mercury, whom Lactantius affirmeth to be the first of that name, to whom Vulcan the son of Nilus succeeded in the kingdom. But the first that taught the use of letters among the Latins was Nicostrata, surnamed Carmenta. Thus we see 7 sorts of letters most famous in antiquity: the Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Syriac, Chaldean, Egyptian, and Getic, of which in a very ancient manuscript Cornelius reports that he hath read these following verses. First Moses Hebrew letters did invent, to Attica the wife Phoenicians sent. The Latin ones Nicostrata found out, Syriac and Chaldee Abram without doubt. Ipsis the Egyptians taught, not with less art, to Getins Galphila did theirs impart. But other people and barbarous nations of latter times have invented new letters. For Cordanus the bishop invented letters for the Goths and the ancient Franks, who under the leading of Marcomerus and Pharmond vanquished the Gauls, used certain characters very little different from the Greeks, which letters Wastaldus, writing their history in their own language, made use of. There are also other letters extant among the Franks, whose inventor one Doracus is said to be, far differing in character from those of Wastaldus, together with others of whom Hiccus a Frank was the author, who came out of Scythia to the mouth of the Rhine with Marcomer. Beda also produces the characters of certain Norman letters, but without any certainty of their first inventor. Many other nations have appointed for their own use several new characters of letters, either borrowed from the ancients, or which they did in part change and corrupt. Thus, the Dalmatians corrupted the Grecians, the Armenians the Chaldean, the Lombards and Goths defaced and altered the Latin characters. Many ancient letters are also quite lost, as of the ancient Hetrurians, which, notwithstanding formerly, were in high esteem among the Romans, as Livy and Pliny witnesses, of which letters the characters are to be seen in many ancient coins, although their signification be altogether unknown. For the Romans, herefore conquering the greatest part of the world, took from many nations the use of their own letters, and violently imposed upon them their own forms. In the like manner, the Hebrew letters were lost in the captivity of Babylon, and their language was corrupted by the Chaldeans. Thus the ancient letters of the Germans, Spaniards, and other nations perished upon introducing the Roman character, and their languages were also by the same means wholly corrupted. On the other side, the letters and language of the Romans were corrupted and changed by the Goths, Lombards, Franks, and other barbarous nations. Neither is the Latin language now in use, the fame with which that in time of yore. Concerning the Hebrew language and character, there is no small dissension among the Talmudists, for Rabbi Jehuda faith that Adam, that first man spake the Aramaean language. Marsur affirms that the law was delivered by Moses in the character which is said to be the Hebrew, but in the sacred idiom of speech, which being afterwards changed into the Aramaean idiom, and written in the Assyrian character by Esdras, a little while after retaining the Assyrian characters, reassumed the sacred idiom. Others say that the law was not written in other characters at first than those at present known, but that sometimes it was changed upon their fallings away, and by restored upon their repentance. Rabbi Simon, the son of Eleazar, believes neither the language nor character to have at any time been changed. So little of certain concerning the Hebrew letters is there among the Hebrews themselves. And indeed, such are the alterations happening through the vicissitude of times, that there are no languages or letters that are able to make good the antiquity or truth of their first original. Chapter 3 of Grammar. Yet, out of these so inconstant and in all ages mutable principles of letters and languages, grammar first, then the other arts of well speaking proceeded. For when it seemed to be of little use to know letters, unless they were joined together in a certain method and form, and syllables framed thereof, which at length might grow into words and sentences for the understanding of speech, then did certain indigenous men undertake to ordain rules of speaking, that is to say, the construction of government of words and things signified, imposing as it were a bridle upon speech, that whatever was written or said according to those rules should be well written or said, and should be the art of well speaking, which art they called grammar. The first inventor were among the Grecians is said to be Prometheus. Crates Miletus was the first that brought it into Rome, being sent by Attalus between the second and third Punic War, which afterwards Polema professed with great ostentation, so that he gave a new name thereto, calling grammar the Polemonian art. A man so arrogant that he boasted that letters had their beginning, and should die with him, so proved that he despised all the most learned men of his age, not forbearing to call Marcus Varro hog. However, the Latin grammar is so barren, and so much beholden to Greek literature that whoever understands not so much is to be ejected out of the number of grammarians. Therefore, all the foundation and reason of grammar consists only in the use and authority of our ancestors, who have been pleased that a thing shall be so called and so written, that words should be so compounded and construed, which being so done, they esteem well done. From whence, though grammar boast itself to be the art of well speaking, yet doth it falsely claim that preeminence, seeing that with more advantage we learn that very thing from our mothers and nurses, rather than from the grammarians. The language and speech of the Gracchi, who were most eloquent men, their mothers Cornelia polished and adorned. Istrata taught her son Silas, son of Agrippa, king of Scythia, the Greek tongue. And it is well known that in many provinces where foreign colonies have been introduced, the children have still retained the dialect of their mothers. Hence it is that Plato and Quintilian are so careful in appointing rules for the choice of a fit nurse. Far be it from us, therefore, to acknowledge the reason of well speaking to these grammarians, who professing grammar only, and making that their only business, yet are skilled in nothing less. Priscian could not learn his art in the whole time of his life, and Didymus is said to have some say 6,000 books upon the subject. They report that Claudius Caesar was so given to the Greek tongue that he added 3 new letters thereto, which afterwards made use of when he was a prince. Charles the Great is said to have compiled a grammar for the German tongue, giving new names to the months and winds. Even to this hour, how men toil and labor day and night, scribing continually of all sorts, commentaries, forms of elegancy or phrases, questions, annotations, animadversions, observations, castigations, centuries, miscellanies, antiquities, paradoxes, collections, additions, lucubrations, additions upon additions. And yet not one of them all, whether Grecian or Latin, hath given any account how the parts of speech are to be distinguished, or what order is to be observed in their construction, or whether there be only 50 pronouns, as Priscian believes, or whether more, as Diomedes and Phocas will have it. Whether a participle put by itself be sometimes a participle, or whether gerunds are nouns or verbs. Why among the Greeks nouns plural of the neuter gender are joined with a verb of the singular number? Upon what account it may be lawful to pronounce in Latin words terminating a and us, as for margarita, margaritum, for punctus, punctum, how it comes that the word Jupiter makes Jovis in the genitive case. Why many write most Latin words with a Greek diphthong, others not, as Felix, Quitio, whether the Latin diphthongs are only written and not pronounced, or whether there be a double pronunciation in one syllable. Likewise, why in some Latin words some use the Greek y, and some the Latin I only, as in considero? Why in some words some double the letters, some not, as casa, religio, religio? Why the word cacabus, by position long, by reason of the double e, is notwithstanding most commonly by the poets made a dactyl? Whether Aristotle's word for the soul ought to be writ endelekia with a delta, or entelekia with a tau. I omit their infinity and never to be reconciled contentions about accents, orthography, pronunciation of letters, figures, etymologies, analogies, declinings, matter of signification, changes of cases, variety of tenses, moods, persons, numbers, and also about the various impediments and order of construction. Lastly, concerning the number and pedigree of the Latin letters, whether H be a letter or not, and many other trifles of the same nature, so that not only as to words and syllables, but also in the very elements and foundations of grammar itself, no reason can be given of such their continual warfare. Such kind of battle as this, Lucian of Samos has very elegantly described about the consonants S and T, whether should have the victory in the word thalassa or thalata, answerable to which one Andreas Salernitanus hath with very much wit compiled his grammatical war. But these are poor and low things, but more and of greater consequence could we urge concerning their depraved significations of words, which with they impose upon the greatest part of the universe, not a little to the damage of the public weal, while they interpret subjection to the law, servitude, liberty of the people, they call that, when everyone has liberty to do what he pleases. Acrisonomy, or equality of right, they call that, when there is the same punishment, the same reward to all alike. In like manner, they call that a quiet and peaceable government, when all things submit to the inordinate will of the prince, that a happy government when the people wallow in ease and luxury. By such like expositions as these, and many other, physic and law are corrupted, nay, the very scriptures, and Christ himself are compelled to be at a kind of variance one with another, and himself with himself, wresting those holy words not according to the meaning of the Holy Ghost, nor to the advantage of humane salvation, but to the sense and meaning of their insignificant compendiums and descants thereupon, whence arise most eminent mischiefs, error in words, being many times the parent of error in matter. This mistake was grievous to Saul first, king of the Jews, in the word Zobar, which signifies both a male and the memory, so that when God said, I will root out the memory of Amalek, Saul thought that he had sufficiently executed the command in destroying all the males. The like error befell the Greeks and Latins in the word phos, which signifies both light and man, by which ambiguity of the word the ancient adorers of Saturn, being deceived, were wont to sacrifice a man in their usual ceremonies, whereas otherwise they might have as well appeased their deity by the only kindling of proper lights and fires, which error was afterwards reformed by the prudence of Hercules. Last of all, divines and holy friars, mixing themselves among the tribe of grammarians, are forced to make use of heresy to make good their contests about the signification of words, overturning the scriptures for grammar's fake, evil interpreters of words well spoken, men truly vain and truly unhappy, blinding themselves with their own art, and flying the light of truth, who, while they over-diligently scrutinize into the fore of words, lose the sense of the scripture, not willing to understand the word of truth, which puts us in the mind of the story of the priest, who, having many host at one elevation, for fear of committing a grammar absurdity, cried out, These are my bodies! Whence, as of that execrable heresy of the anti-Decomarianites and the Elvidians, denying the perpetual virginity of the Blessed Virgin, but from that one word until, where it is said, because Joseph did not know her until she had brought forth her firstborn. What strife and contention have those two syllables from and through raised between the Latin and Greek Church? The Latins asserting the Holy Ghost to proceed from the Father and from the Son, the Greeks denying him to proceed from the Son, but from the Father through the Son. How many tragedies has the word Nicaea been the occasion of in the Council of Basel? The Bohemians asserting the Lord's Supper to be necessary in both kinds, because it is written, Unless ye eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, ye shall not have life in ye. Whence that opinion of the Waldenses and others, their followers concerning the Eucharist, but from the word is, which they will have symbolically understood, which the Roman Church would have meant essentially. There are other pernicious heresies of the grammarians, but so nice, so subtle, that unless the Oxmians, the most acute divines of England, or the Sorbonnists of Paris, have discovered them with their lynx's eyes and condemned under great seals, it would be difficult to shun them. Of this nature are those subtleties, which is best said, Christ thou preachest, Christ preachest. I believe, thou believeth, believing am I. Also that the word, the permanent word, may be deprived of all its accidents. Also that there is no name of the third person, and the like, which if they be heretical, then are Isaiah and Malachi in the first place to be counted heretics, who both introduce God speaking of himself in the third person. The first, when God speaks to Ezekiel, saying, Ego adet, not Adam super dies tuos. The other is this, et domine ego, ubi est timor meus. In which place he makes God giving himself the appellation of Dominos in the plural number. Much rather ought they to be accounted heretics, who are now esteemed the chief divines in the Roman world, amusing and clouding the whole doctrine of the Orthodox Church with novelty of pronunciation, contrary to all the rules and maxims of grammar, with far strained words, new-made vocabularies, and abstruse sophisms, teaching, moreover, that the doctrine of theology cannot be truly delivered in neat and genuine language. And a miserable thing it is to consider what debates, what errors these obstinate grammarians and proud sophists are the occasion of, by means of their perverse and imperious interpretations of words. While some of words gather sentences, others out of sentences gather words. Hence in physic, in both laws, in philosophy, in theology, infinite arguments and errors arise. For grammarians demonstrate nothing, but solely lean upon authorities, which are ofttimes so various and discordant among themselves, that of necessity the most of them must be false, insomuch that they who most confide it to the purpose, for all the laws of speech abide not with the grammarians, but with the people, that by continual custom attain the use and habit of well speaking. Now the vigor of the Latin tongue, after it ceased among the people, through the invasion of barbarous nations, the true substance thereof is not to be sought among the grammarians, but among the most authentic and learned authors, as Cicero, Cato, Varro, both Plinius, Quintilian, Seneca, Suetonius, Quintus Curtius, Livier, Sallust, and such like, in whose writings only remain the delights of the Latin language and the custom of well speaking, not in the scribblements of grammatical lettermongers, who by their starched rules concerning declining of verbs and cases, compounds and disponents, impose more upon the Latin tongue, and oftentimes framed themselves stranger words than is fit for the Latin language to own, though it be apparent to the world that there is no faith to be given to these grammarians touching the truth of the Latin tongue. Yet these impertinent scribblers arrogate themselves to be the only censurers of other men's writing. They're judges and interpreters, and all books and authors to reduce into method, and to allow or reject at their pleasures. Never was any author of so sublime a wit, whatever extant, which has escaped their malicious slanders, or whom they have not taxed and calumniated as they thought good. They accused Plato of confusion. Of whole faults George Trapezunt hath put forth several books, who, as Cornelius declares, is therefore by others called the parent of truth and verity. They seek this is in Old English. It has those little F things for S's. It's very confusing. They seek perspicuity in Aristotle, condemn him of obscurity, giving him the nickname of sepia or cuttlefish. Virgil they condemn for little wit and for being a plagiary and a usurper of other men's works. Demosthenes displeases Tully. On the other side, Tully, that great rhetorician of the Latins, is accused of bribery, reproached for being fearful, superfluous in repetitions, cold in his joking, tedious in his exordiums, idle in his digressions, seldom growing warm, slowly swelling, yea, reprehended by those even of our age, and by Capella taxed for his disorderly sail, but more by Apollinaris, branded for being flat and insipid. Trogus condemns Livy's orations for fictions. Plautus and Horace cannot agree. Lucilius is damned for the rusticness of his hobbling verse. Pliny, like a rapid stream, is said to grasp and overflow with too much matter. Ovid is complained of for too much indulging his own fancy. Sallust is accused of affectation by Asinius Pollio. Terence could do little without the assistance of Labeo and Scipio. Seneca is adjudged to be lime without sand, whom Quintilian taxed in these words: if he bad not condemned his equals, had he not been covetous, had he not too much loved and admired his own things, if he had not injured weighty matters with trivial sentences, he then might have been esteemed more in the judgment of learned men than in the love of children. Marcus Varro is called a hog. Macrobius is a most learned man degraded as one of an impudent and ungrateful genius. Neither is there any that ever wrote in Latin whom Laurentius Valla, the learnedest of all the grammarians, hath spared in his anger, and yet him hath Mancinellus most cruelly butchered. Servius of old was thought to have well deserved of the Latin tongue, yet hath Baraldus most furiously opposed him, and our later grammarians altogether shun him as a barbarian. Thus, all the grammarians rage one against other, but lastly by their means it comes to pass that the translation of the Holy Scriptures under pretense of correction hath been so often changed that now it seems altogether to differ from itself. Through their devices and censures, those doubts now reigning have been raised concerning the Revelation, the Epistle of St. Paul to the Hebrews, the Epistle of Jude, and many other places and chapters of the New Testament by many called in question, even to an endeavor of subverting the Evangeles themselves. But now to the poets. Chapter 4 of Poesy. Poesy, in the judgment of Quintilian, is another part of grammar, for this reason not a little proud that heretofore theatres and amphitheatres, the most stately fabrics of the time, were with great cost and magnificence erected, not for philosophers, lawyers, physicians, not for rhetoricians, mathematicians, or divines, but to represent the fables of the poets. An art invented to no other purpose, but with lascivious rhythms, measure of syllables, and the jingling noise of fine words to allure and charm the ears of men addicted to folly, and furthermore, with the pleasing enticements of fables and mistakes of feigned stories to ensnare and deceive the mind. Therefore hath she deserved no other title than to be the female architect of falsehood, and the preserver of idle and fond opinions. And though we may pardon so much of her as countenances madness, drunkenness, impudence, and boldness, yet who can bear with patience her undaunted confidence in maintaining lies? For what corner of the earth has she not filled with her hair-brained trifles and idle fables? Taking the first rife of her fabulous stories from the very chaos, she relates the divisions of heaven, the birth of Venus, the fight of the Titans, the infancy of Jove, the deceits of Rhea, and cheat of the stone, Saturnus bonds, the rebellion of the giants, the thievery and punishment of Prometheus, the wanderings of Delos, the travail of Latona, the slaughter of Pytho, the treachery of Tyrus, Deucalion's flood, stones turned into men, the butcheries of Aeacus, the fraud of Juno, Semele's conflagration, the double progeny of Bacchus, and whatever is reported of Minerva, Vulcan, Erichthonius, Boreas, Oricius, Theseus, Aegis, Castor, Pollux, the rape of Helen, the death of Hippolytus. To these may be added the absconding of Ceres, the rape of Proserpina, together with the stories of Minos, Cadmus, Niobe, Pentheus, Attius, Oedipus, the labors of Hercules, the fight of the son of Neptune, Athamas' madness, Io turned into a heifer, and Argos, her keeper killed by Mercury, with those other dreams of the golden fleece, Peleus, Jason, Medea, the death of Agamemnon, and punishment of Clytemnestra, Danae, Perseus, Gorgon, Cassiopeia, Andromeda, Orpheus, Orestes, the travels of Aeneas and Ulysses, Circe, Pelagon, Aeolus, Palamedes, Nauplius, Ajax, Daphne, Ariadne, Europa, Phaedra, Pasiphae, Daedalus, Icarus, Glaucus, Atlas, Geryon, Tantalus, Pan, Centaurus, Satyr, Sirens, and whatever else has been delivered to the memory concerning these notorious untruths. Neither hath she been contented only with mankind, but also she hath made the gods themselves party to her delusive stories, relating in pleasing measures and in the mischievous charms of verse their birth, their deceases, strifes, quarrels, animosities, battles, wounds, lamentations, bonds, loves, lusts, fornications, adulteries, not only deceiving and infecting the present age, but having neatly preserved and picked up these bestialities of the gods in neat verse and meter, communicates the fame to posterity, like the venom of mad dogs, compelling all that are bit to be in the same condition. And with so much art are her lies woven, that they are often prejudicial to true history, as appears by the feigned adultery of Dido with Aeneas, and the taking of Troy by the Greeks. Some there are arrived at such a height of madness that they ascribed some share of divinity to her because the devils formerly returned their answers in poetical anagrams. Hence poets are in some sense said to be prophets, and inspired from above, their trifling verses being used as oracles and answers in divination, which is the reason that Spartianus, in the life of Trojan, makes mention of sortes Homericae, so called from the verse of Homer, and of the Virgiliani Fortes, so named from the poems of Virgil, which superstition is now transferred and applied to sacred text, and the poetry of the Psalms, not without the connivance of some of the greatest masters of our religion. But to return to the poesy, St. Austin's hath commanded it to be exiled from the city of God. Heathen Plato expels it out of his commonwealth, and Cicero forbids it to be admitted. Socrates admonishes the person that desires to keep the virgin purity of his good name undefiled to beware of the acquaintance of poets, for that their power to praise is not so great as the force that lies in their slander and dispraise. Thus we see Minos, celebrated by Homer and Hesiod, from the justice of the kings because he made war upon the Athenians, raised all the tragic poets about his ears, who immediately sent him packing to hell. Penelope, so famous in Homer for her chastity, yet Lycophron reproaches as one that lay with many adulterers. Most virtuous and continent widow, foundress of Carthage, Ennius the poet, in his poem upon Scipio's life, feigns to have unchastely loved Aeneas, whom by computation of time it was impossible for her to have seen. And Virgil confirms the same so plausibly that the story had almost gained belief. At length, this liberty of lying and slandering was advanced to that height that the censors thought fit to enact a law whereby the falsehoods and reproaches of poets might be suppressed. Among the ancient Romans, poesy was held in great disrepute, so that whoever gave his mind to the study thereof was, as Gellius and Cato witness, accounted as a public enemy. And Q. Fuvius was accused by M. Cato, for that he, going proconsul to Asia, had taken Ennius the poet along with him to bear his company. Neither doth that great judiciary, the Emperor Justinian, give any freedom or immunity to the professors thereof. Homer was called the philosopher of all poets, and the poet of all philosophers. Yet the Athenians laid a fine upon him as a madman, of 50 drachmas, and they laughed at and derided Dictius the poet, as one beside his wits. The Lacedaemonians also commanded the books of Archilochus the poet to be carried out of their city. And thus the best and wisest of men have always despised poesy as the parent of lies, finding poets to be such monstrous liars, as being such who never made it their study to speak or deliver in writing anything of found knowledge, only to tickle the ears and fancies of vain persons with idle stories, always building castles in the air, as Campanus hath truly said of them. Mad poets only on their verses feed. Reject their fables, they will starve for need. Their lies their riches are, and all their gold they feign, and think that they enjoy, so bold to think that palm grows, only the reward to crown the brows of every lying bard. Furthermore, there are most desperate contentions, not only about the forms and figures of verses, and also concerning the feet, accents, and quantity of syllables long and short, for these are the trifles of grammarians, but also about their own toys, figments and lies. For example, the Club of Hercules, the Chaste Tree, the Letters of the Hyacinth, the Daughters of Niobe, the tree under which Latona brought forth, as also concerning the country of Homer and his sepulchre, which was eldest in time, Homer or Hesiod, whether Patroclus was before Achilles, in what attire Anacharsis is the Scythian slept, why Homer did not honor Palamedes, whether Lucan be to be placed among the poets or heretics, also concerning the thefts of Virgil, and what time of the year he died. Who was the author of the little epigrams is a great contest among the grammarians, and hitherto undecided. To say truth, all the verses of the poets are full of impostures and fables, invented for the delight of fools under pretense of flattery, or detraction of the worst of men. Whatever poets do, whether they relate praise or invoke, 'tis all but in flattery of their own fables. Again, whether they inveigh, satirize, or accuse, they do it in applause of their own fables, acting always the parts of madmen. Wrong therefore did Democritus call poesy not an art but madness. Therefore Plato said that he never knocked at a poet's doors, being in his wits. Then are poets said to express most admirable lines, whether they are either mad or drunk. For this cause St. Austin calls poesy the wine of error, quaffed only by drunken doctors. St. Jerome also calls poesy the meat of the devils, an art of itself, thin and naked, which is in reality a mere insipid thing, unless it be clad and seasoned with some another learning. An art always hungry, always starving, and like mice, feeding on stolen cates. Yet I know not with what boldness in the midst of their trifles and fables, like Tithonus, grasshoppers, the Lythian frogs, the Myrmidons, emmets, promising to themselves immortal fame and glory. Live happy then, such charms my numbers boast. No day shall see ye in oblivion lost. Which indeed is no fame or reward at all, or at most very little profitable. Neither is it the office of a poet, but of a historian, to prolong the life of reputation. Thank you for letting me read to you. Please check the description for where to buy my art and my channel page for where to send me a one-time donation. Please watch my movie, Salome's Last Prance, based on, well, it is a presentation of Oscar Wilde's Salome, the band play, and it's an audiovisual thingy thing. And I will see you tomorrow.